How's it going, YouTube? Today we're going to be talking about Scorn. Oh man, there is so much to say about this game. The game was officially announced November 12th, 2014. So it's been in development for 8 years. A lot of people on the internet, myself included, we are really looking forward to this game. It was just so creative, so different, and so not the usual game design that we've seen from all games so far. Yes, it was a first-person shooter. Ended up being a puzzle game. Nobody thought it was going to be a puzzle game. We kind of thought it was going to be more of a survival shooter with a few puzzles thrown in. However, that is not what it ended up being. It was mostly puzzles. It was like 90% puzzles, but more onto that later. So after 8 years of development and a bunch of hype, this game, I would honestly say, was a pretty big letdown and a huge disappointment all around. While there are good parts to the game, it just doesn't deliver on what we all thought. And now expectations can be hard to deliver, especially with these day and age with everyone's expectations. We all didn't really expect a perfect game, but we definitely didn't expect this. Anyway, I'm going to be going in, reviewing this game, and giving my thoughts on 5 different aspects of the game. As per usual, these aspects are going to consist of stability and quality, gameplay, content, aesthetic style, and overall enjoyability. And at the end, I'll give it a total score, and we'll figure out how good Scorn is. Alright, on to the first point. Stability and quality. The stability of this game is, alright. Nothing super remarkable. Nothing to write home about. When I played this game, I ran it on high settings with only 2 notable performance drops. One of them completely froze my game for about 3 to 4 seconds. This happened maybe 3 times throughout the whole playthrough. It wasn't really all that bad, and there's games that have had pretty similar performance issues, so I would say it's about average. One time I froze, it kept me from avoiding an attack resulting in a death and making me restart, which wasn't a huge big of a deal. It just kind of was a little bit annoying because it made me redo 5 minutes of progress, but in the end it wasn't super detrimental to the game. It just, after being 4 hours into the game, I can say I was already kind of annoyed, and this just was icing on the cake on top of the other things, which I will get to later in the video. All of the things I've said considered, I would say it's about an average amount of stutters and freezes, but nothing crazy. It was out of the 7 hours of content I played from this game, it's not terrible, but it's not great either. It's just about average. The quality of the game's designs overall are pretty good. Maps, cutscenes, and UI are great. However, the save system is just absolutely atrocious and drove me up the wall a few times. You can't save and return to any point in the middle of a chapter, like a specific puzzle, because there's usually about arbitrary number, 6 to 5 puzzles in that range, I think, per chapter. And depending on, you move really slowly, and solving those puzzles, once you solve it the first time, you can figure it out the second time, but just having to redo all of that, as well as fighting the enemies, it's 30 minutes of progress sometimes, and it really was just not fun to deal with, because of one thing that I ran into with the saving progression is it saves per puzzle, I noticed, unless you leave the game. When you leave the game, it just starts at the beginning of a chapter, but if you're in game and you die, it resets you to the last puzzle that you solved, or the progression's point. You unlock the door, you solved the puzzle, you got an item, blah blah blah. And this can be really annoying because that can lock you into a bad state. I personally got locked into a death state where every time I loaded in, I had less than a second to move, and you can't move very fast, so it's not like I can just hit a button, maybe dash the way, and use skill to get out of that situation. I just literally couldn't do anything. I'd spawn in, and the second I'd see my character, I would get shot by a thing and die. So what I had to do was I'd leave the game, boot it back up, and I lost about an hour of time due to this because I had to redo the entire chapter, and it was just, it was really annoying. This just makes it so you can't progress from where you're at. You could potentially be losing time if you have to go to bed, go to work, do other things. And it really just keeps you from wanting to continue the game, especially on top of the content that it offers. There's nothing really driving you to come back. And then the saves are going to fuck you up as well, so you can't just pick up right where you left off. It just feels very old for It's an outdated save system. We have a ton of games that allow you to jump back into the game right where you are, and I know people are going to say, well, like, Dark Souls doesn't do that, but Dark Souls does offer like bonfires, you know exactly where you're going to save at, and yes, it might take off time, but it's always consistent. You always spawn back at that bonfire and do that thing, and so you can plan accordingly. With all that, and maybe having to redo certain puzzles, redo certain encounters, refight certain enemies, it can just, the game already feels repetitive, and this just adds on to it, and it becomes to run its course pretty fast. And honestly, halfway to 3/4 of the way through the game, I really just felt like it was a chore to finish the game, out of pride and being like, I've been so excited for this game so long, I have to just finish the game just to know that I did it. But the last hour or so of the game was just awful. I wanted to go. It might have been that I was up late and I was playing the game at like 12, like right before, and I'd work the next day. But I just wanted to get the game done. I really didn't want to pick it up again the next day. I wanted to just get it over with, and I just wanted to get out of it. So that's my opinion on how the quality affects the gameplay loop, which doesn't really bode well for the quality of a game when you don't want to be in the game anymore. Because why would you want to spend a night in a house that doesn't make you feel comfortable? And I guess comfortable is probably a bad word for it. I would say stability and quality is about average, a little below average, but nothing too jarring, and we're going to move on to the next point. The next area we will be covering will be gameplay. This game's gameplay loop consists of two major things: puzzles and shooting. And there's a lot to get in here because there's a lot of other games that are puzzles and shooting, Destiny for instance, but it's the way that they handle these things is the main issue. First, the shooting feels clunky and slow to a point that makes encountering any enemy not scary or fun or difficult. It just becomes annoying because you're not like, oh my gosh, the enemy's going to come for me and it's going to be intense and it's going to be whatever. It's just going to be this slow lump of meat is going to wiggle its way close enough to shoot me with a projectile, and I'm going to have to use this clunky gun to hit every headshot. And or I could possibly like use up all my life tokens or whatever, and it wasn't that it was difficult, because it really wasn't difficult. It wasn't the fact that it was like, it was slow, and I don't really like. I think if you have a shooting point in your game, it shouldn't be slow on purpose, or I don't know how to say this, because there's like games that are slow but are fun, but the shooting still feels fun because the enemies are fun. And with slow enemies and slow you just feel like you're running away from a dangerous turtle, which isn't with a broken leg. Like, it's not very exciting. You're just kind of like, oh man, I really hope this fucking thing doesn't catch up to me. Oh god. And then if it does catch up to you, you're either really wounded or you like are dead. And then it just sets you up for failure in the future. And it just didn't feel good. It's hard to explain, but it just did not feel good. And for it not being scary too, for this game, kind of whole emphasis is on horror and like vibe and just making you feel uncomfortable. It doesn't feel uncomfortable, it's more annoying. You know what I mean? Anyway, this goes into my point about the save system. When you have the save system so janky, and then you have to repeat these parts of annoyance, it's just forcing you to go through these points that you're like, okay, I beat these enemies, and then you die. Hopefully you don't die, but if you do die, if you're not like super good at video games and super good at dealing with bullets, and they'll just continue to kill you. And yes, you have to get better, but it doesn't feel good. When you get better, it just feels like, okay, I can get through this game faster. And so I would say it makes fighting enemies the weakest and the worst part of this game. And that's not good to say when half of the game is fighting the enemies. And then the combat mechanics, there's literally 3 combat mechanics that involve in the shooting. You've got walk, shoot, and sprint. And that's being really generous to call it a sprint. It's more as if like you're walking across a crosswalk and you want to make yourself seem like you're moving faster, but you're really not. So kind of just like looks like you're moving fast, like your arms move faster, but it's very unnoticeable with the actual movement speed. It's very minimal. And that will go into something I would say that it's so close to being a good game. There's a lot of like amazing potential here. They just miss the mark in certain areas, and I will go over. I'll go over the things I would fix about the game that I could see making this game go from a disaster to a masterpiece just by changing a few simple things. I mean, honestly, a melee, a quick step, crouch, or even maybe a full-on sprint would have done tons of help to create a more enjoyable combat loop, especially when that's half of the gameplay in your game. That's a pretty big deal to like get that right. Like that would have just. I think that would have improved the gameplay loop a ton. The puzzles, I mean, they're pretty creative, and they have interesting and gross ideas to them. For example, one of the puzzles is a door that needs more than your 2 hands to open. And to solve the puzzle, you have to solve a couple other minor puzzles, like where to go and which path to take. And then you actually have to solve pretty much a real puzzle. I can't remember one of those. It's like one of those sliding block puzzles where you just slide the things around to create the image, but instead of creating an image, you're creating a path. Eventually, you'll get another creature to help you by either killing them and using one of their amputated limbs, or you can free them from like a restrictive egg-like shell and walk them over to the machine. And this is overall, it's a pretty simplistic puzzle in design, but portrayed in probably the most gruesome and disgusting way that I think really only Scorn can get away with at this moment. I'm sure there's other games that could do it, because there are like equally disgusting games, but they're not in the same way. Like there's Dead Space and there's stuff like that. But this game is just, if I had to give it a word, I'd give it the word sadistic. Because there's nothing really entertaining about the gore. It's just kind of fucked up to look at. Like, I found myself being really amazed for the first like hour, and then it really just kind of becoming a lot over time, and I just found myself being like, whoa, this is not a world I want to be in for much longer, because it's just a lot. And I could see a very interesting story coming out of it, and it being weird and creative with all of its things, but it ends up becoming a lot pretty quickly. The other puzzles throughout the game are pretty much just repeats of that puzzle and are pretty much just essentially fetch quests. Like, go here, grab this key, unlock this door, and then there's pretty much minimal variation to these puzzle designs, creating just for a repetitive cycle of just shoot, puzzle solve, here's some more enemies, puzzle solve. Oh, this creature's digging out your insides. Shoot some enemies, puzzle solve. You're kind of getting the idea of the gameplay. Alright, now we're on content. For content, there's about 5 to 6 hours available to play in this game. Unless you like speedrun it, you could definitely get it, not even speedrunning, but like with a moderate, like if you've played it before, you know where to go, and you're really making your way through it, you can make it through in 4 to 3 hours even. And you'll spend these 5 to 6 hours on average walking, shooting, and solving puzzles in a very detailed, desolate, and dead environment, which was at one point Earth. But I only really actually figured that out by watching a lore video of it on YouTube, because there's nothing really that indicates that it is Earth. There's just desert. If anything, it looks more like Mars. So it just led me to believe that it was some unnamed planet with unnamed creatures that happened to be humanoid, and then there was this weird fungus corruption monster things that popped up out of nowhere, and you have to get through them to eventually do something. I still don't really know what the whole point of the game is, but it was for a little bit interesting to walk around. There's no dialogue of any kind, there's no NPCs to talk to, and there's not even anything to read to get a glimpse of like what happened in this thing. You kind of just have to read the writings on the wall. I mean, that's a bad analogy. The drawings on the wall, if anything, and the sexual statues, for lack of a better word, basically depicting porn, or the reproductive cycle if you want to be more scientific about it. There's pretty much just the environment that has some story to put together and speculate. And if you know the source material, that'll definitely help you out more to figure out what's going on. Yeah, so which will help you understand what they're trying to say. Which led to a really ambiguous ending that kind of left me and most people who played it with this like disappointed feeling. Because everything leading up to the end was like mysterious and intriguing and like kind of like creepy, that like kind of drawed you in a weird way. So much so that had you had so many questions, like while you're walking through the world, like, what's this? What is this for? Why is this way? Why is there no one else here other than me? But the problem is, we just kept getting more and more and more and more questions. Except for one question got answered eventually, which was, when does this end? It ends when the game ends, and you'll figure that out by playing all of it. And that's the only question they answer. And that question we all hoped would come sooner rather than later. Which really sucks because a lot of people that knew about this game, myself included, and followed its development, wanted so much. And I know a lot of you out there who were either watching this video or watched other people like Moist Critical or Scale Up or maybe IGN if that's your flavor, really wanted to enjoy this game from beginning to end, and eventually found themselves waiting and wanting to finish the game. And it was just something you kind of got through, and then you were like, well, that happened. And I honestly think this game could have benefited from a few minor tweaks, which would have changed this game from a disappointment to a masterpiece. Aesthetic style. Let's do this. This game is literally all about art. It has breathtaking, grotesque puzzle mechanics, disgusting gun reloads, and the eerie and uncomfortable environments. The visuals completely emulate that of the artists the game was inspired from. It's almost as if you're walking around in a painting created by them together, because there's two different artists to collaborate, most notably H.R. Geiger, or Giger, depending on where you're from, but I would say Geiger. The other one I don't know is notable, but I know a lot of people in the comments will probably note him. If you know the artist, comment below. But for me, I was only affiliated with H.R. Geiger, and I think it's just there's so much creativity emanating off of this game. It's insane. From the intricate and long corridors that use connecting orifices to build a bridge, down to the inventory UI being a hostile alien that literally holds your stuff for you. Writing-wise, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I think that's such a fascinating idea that like your UI isn't like a 2D plane. It's like a physical thing that you like are doing with. And I don't know if I can say I know of a lot of other games that do like a physical UI rather than like a 2D UI. Most games do 2D UI where it's like a menu and there's boxes and there's things in those boxes. The only other one notable that I know of, if there's any more, please let me know below because I would love to check them out. I love that. I love UI design, especially 3D UI design. But the only one that I know of is Astroneer, and that one has a backpack that you pull up and then you physically take the things off the backpack, and there's like very little transition time. But that's the only one that I know of. To me, that is what has originally brought me to this game, was the creativity and the artwork, because it was just like, it was so amazing to be like, whoa, holy shit, this is like crazy visuals. Also, the artist kind of doesn't have a special place in my heart. It was just something that a family member of mine really loved, and it was kind of interesting to be like, oh, hey, look at this game. It's got that artist you like. And that kind of got me into it, but that's a story for another time. Last but not least, the overall enjoyability. Because, I mean, what else are games for? I really enjoyed this game for the first hour or two I played it. I was soaking in all of the weird things that made up this game, and just being in awe at the intricate designs that had so much care put into every detail. Although, once I got kind of over the fantasy, and I was like, I've seen everything I could see. I've seen the detailed corridors, I've seen the fog lighting, I've seen the guns, I've seen the UI, I've seen everything. It just ended up being pretty barren. But because once all that faded, all I was left with was to beat the game and find out the mystery of what the hell is going on. After a while, I found it really hard to spend another second killing a static, uninteresting enemy that could potentially just waste an hour of my time, which honestly I don't like. I don't like when a game feels like it's a waste of time. And doing that just in order to solve a trivial wandering puzzle that just leads to a whole lot of nothing. So for like 60% of this game, I was just like pushing through with it to get it over with, and that really just dragged my overall enjoyability down a lot. And I would just say that like there's just not much to the game other than the visuals. There's just not a lot there. There's not good gun mechanics. There's not good puzzle mechanics. There's like the first puzzle's cool, and there's like a couple other puzzles that are like interesting in a sense. The visuals are interesting. You have to go, not to spoil it, but also to spoil it, because I don't know how much I actually care, and it doesn't really spoil the story, but you have to get a thing that is organic, and you have to put it in a container to get this red fluid. And at first you're like, what the hell's the red fluid? And then you figure out the red fluid is what happens when you squish the organic being down and it like squishes it into like pulp, like orange juice, and then it puts it in the vial, and you have to kill two of them to squish them, and then you get the vial, and then you have to get it again because it's the same fucking thing. They reuse the same thing like 3 times. And it's just, that's like the visual, you get it, like the visuals are interesting, but the actual mechanics aren't all that interesting because they're kind of, you know how to do them the whole time. You just don't know where to do them. That's it. For the first 40% of this game, I was having a great time in awe, taking in the visuals, and then for the last 60, it was just to get through the game, just to say I finished it so I could publish a review. That's about it. I really was hoping for a lot more from this video game. And not a lot more in an unrealistic way, but a lot more in just like I wanted to say normal amount of way, but I guess this game started in 2014, but the way this game was designed doesn't feel 2014 worthy. It feels like it's more of like early 2000s worthy, with like bad saves, bad puzzle mechanics, and not a whole lot of thought put into like the combat. It was just like, look how pretty your game is. And so I would say the perfect representation of the game is just proof of concept. I really love creativity, and I want games to be more creative and not so one note and really test the boundaries. But I also want them to put time. I want them to know what they're doing, because that's what it really felt like. At the end of the day, it really felt like they just didn't know what direction they wanted to go with the game. Did they want to make it an action? Did they want to make it a puzzle game? Did they want to make it a survival horror? Because there's bits of all of them, but they're all done to like 30% of their capacity. And then there's the last 10%, which are like narrative driven, but there's like no narrative. So you're kind of like, what exactly are we doing here? And you never really get the answer to that. So I think that's what it was. This game just didn't know what it wanted to be, and I think that would be my biggest creative criticism, other than the fact that I have some ideas on what parts you can just tweak. Just giving yourself a little bit more sprint speed so you can really distinguish between sprinting and walking. Making the guns not as clunky. I don't know exactly how to change that. With the clunky is a very subjective word. And then making the enemies more diverse, I guess, in the way they fight and the things they do, and making them not so static. And then actually giving their like lore bits, because honestly lore would be super cool. I would read all of the lore. I know a lot of people would as well. And now part of the conclusion is to go over the scores. I'll go over them individually, and then I'll give a total score. So starting at stability and quality, I'm going to give that an 8 out of 20. I think that's just below average, but not quite there to be an average game, because it's just, there's some quality issues that I think we're above that level now. Where it's 2022, we've got a lot of good games. There's even good indie games that have this level of quality that I just don't think Scorn meets up to at the moment. Gameplay, I'm also going to give it an 8, because it's just below average. It's pretty bad, actually. It's pretty bad, but I felt like it's worthy of an A because it's kind of just eh. It is boring, but it's kind of just eh also. Like I could really... there are things that make it pretty good and maybe even excellent, but they just missed the mark on it. So I'm going to give it an 8. Content, I'm giving that a 6 because as bad as the gameplay is, I think the content is worse because of the fact that it's only 6 hours. Which ended up actually being a good thing, because I know a lot of people just wanted to get through the game, and if it was just this for fucking 20 hours, people would have hated this game so much more. I think the fact of it being only 6 hours actually probably made it better, because it would have wasted a lot less of people's time collectively. But I think that's also a bad thing, because if the game was good, people would want more of it, and so I'm just going to give it a 6 because there's just no content. Aesthetic style comes out to 16. I think it's excellent. Don't think it's the best, but I think it's absolutely something people should strive for when making a creative game. It's got interesting decals on the walls, really intricate map design, and the puzzles kind of come into that, but it's just really intricate. Like you'll make it over to one area and be like, wow, it's just on the other side of the wall, but it took me 40 minutes to get around to this side of the wall, which kind of, it just like wraps around up and down throughout these things, and I think that's really interesting. And then the gore, the gruesomeness, every aspect, it knows exactly what it wants to be as far as aesthetic style, so it gets a 16. And lastly, my overall enjoyability, it's gonna get just a flat 10, which is just mid, in my opinion. It's very heavy mid, because while I did want to get out of the game, it was fun at some points. There were some cool moments, but I wouldn't even say this game is average amount of fun, where I'm just kind of like, yeah, it's just, I played it once, that was a cool experience, but I will not be returning to it anytime soon, if ever. So those are my thoughts on Scorn. Let me know if you agree. Let me know if you have any gripes. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button. If you want to see more content, you can go down to my YouTube channel. I've got gameplay, I've got some ratings, I've got some streams as well. And if you want to see more content and get notified when I do put out more content, you can subscribe and also ding that notification bell to get notified whenever I put out a new piece of content. Later.